Today in our 2017 Newmar Canyon Star Motorhome, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the SumoSprings Maxim custom helper springs for the rear axle, part number SSR-183-54-1. A common problem we hear a lot about motorhomes is that when you first get them, the suspension can seem very soft, and when you're going around turns, it'll have a lot of body roll, and it doesn't seem like you have a whole lot of control. Not to mention, the side of them are going to catch a lot of wind on the highway. It's just a giant box on wheels, so the wind is just going to catch right on the side. Well, that's where our helper springs are going to come into play. They're going to help reduce that body roll, give us a little bit more stability when we're driving down the road, so everyone can feel a lot more safe and more comfortable. So now that we have them installed, let's go ahead and take them for a ride and see how they handle. With our helper springs installed, I can tell you I definitely feel a difference going around the corners. It doesn't want to roll as much, and it just feels like there's a lot more control. As I'm going over the bumps here, it's not as such of a jarring feeling. It is a little bit cushier, and it's not throwing stuff around in the back of my motorhome. And as I come up to the slalom course, I can definitely go through a lot quicker than I could before because it's not wanting to roll as much, and it's just responding a lot faster. Here's what our helper springs are going to look like once we have them installed. And these are going to greatly reduce the amount of sag or that jarring feeling when we're going down the road from hitting bumps. They are going to work progressively, so if we have a light load or no load in the back, it is going to be a nice soft engagement, but the heavier we get, the stiffer the spring itself is going to get. Now the nice thing about these springs is that it's going to have very minimal lateral expansion, so it's not going to puff out to the sides a whole lot, but it's going to expand and compress vertically, so we don't have to worry about anything extremely close to it. Now the springs themselves are going to be made of a microcellular urethane, so they're going to stand up to UV rays and most automotive chemicals, as well as salt spray, so we don't have to worry about any kind of damage to them from just driving down the road. We're going to have one on each side of the axle, so they are going to work independently from each other. It's going to help out a lot with body roll or if we have an off-center load. Our springs are going to have a maximum of 5,600 pounds of load leveling support, but keep in mind they're not going to increase the capability of our vehicle, and you never want to exceed the manufacturer's recommended weight. One of the best things about these springs is the fact that once we have them installed, they're going to be completely maintenance free. We're not going to have to worry about running air lines or checking the pressure or anything like that, because once they're in, we're ready to hit the road. So now that we've had a look at our Sumo springs, let's show you how to get them installed. The first step in our installation is make sure that we have our motorhome on a nice level surface. We're going to chalk the wheels, and then we're going to lift it by the frame in the rear so the axle can hang down, and we're going to need to remove the wheels. So just keep in mind you want to use all your safety practices, make sure the frame has jack stands under it and that it's fully supported, as well as having those front wheels chalked. Because we are going to be working in this general area right here, so it's going to be extremely hard to get to with the tires in place. So we're going to grab our spring and our bracket, and this small lip here, you want to make sure that it's facing up and that the tabs on the side are going down. We'll place it on top of our spring, line up the holes, and then we're going to take the serrated 3/8 flange nuts, and we'll get them started by hand just to make sure that everything's lined up properly. Then we come back with a 9/16 socket, and we'll snug up those bolts. So now we can grab our lower bracket. Now both of them are going to be exactly the same, so to make sure we have it in the correct orientation, I'm going to take my bracket, and this hook here is going to hook around the U-bolt. So we'll rest it on the frame to where those ears kind of straddle the leaf spring pack, making sure that it hooks back here, and that'll let us know what orientation it needs to go. And for reference, our spring and upper bracket assembly is going to be sitting like this, with the tabs going towards the frame. So looking at this, we know that we're going to want to have that hook on the same side as the tabs. So I flip my spring over. I'm going to line up my bracket on the bottom of the spring here, again with that hook on the same side as those wings, But keep in mind, this is the driver's side, so the passenger side, the bracket is actually going to be opposite. So we're going to take another one of our serrated 3/8 flange nuts, get it started by hand, make sure it's lined up, and then again with that 9/16 socket, tighten it up. So now we can take our spring assembly. I'm just going to loosely get it in place. Now you can see that it is going to be an extremely tight fit to get it in. So if you can, you're just going to want to kind of push down on the top bracket so we can at least get it loosely in there. And then if you need to, take a pry bar or something in between the bracket and this upper piece here to get it back far enough, because we want this to be flush against the frame. So with the bracket in place, you want to make sure on the back side of this U-bolt that that bracket is hooking around it and it can't go any further towards the front, and it's hooking on there nicely. On either side of the bottom bracket here, you'll notice that there's a square hole. We're going to want to grab our carriage bolts and we'll slide them down. And I will let you know that it is going to be a little bit of a tight fit. They will fit down through there, but you may need to grab a hammer and just give it a little tap until they line up, and we'll put the other one in as well. Then we can grab our saddle clamp, and you'll notice it's going to have two holes, kind of be a U shape. You want the flat section to go up towards the leaf spring. We'll line up our holes and have those carriage bolts come down through the bottom. Then we're going to take one of our flange nuts. These are going to be locking flange nuts, and we're just going to loosely thread them onto the bottom for now, just so we don't have to worry about that saddle clamp coming off. And again, with the 9/16 socket, we're going to tighten up these nuts on the bottom, but we're going to alternate going back and forth so it'll draw that saddle clamp up evenly and it doesn't get in a bind. Now in our instructions, they're going to give us a measurement, and you're going to want to measure from the bottom of the frame. I already went ahead and made a mark. Now we're going to want to line up the center of the bottom hole with that mark. So as you can see, it's not that far off on either of our holes, but we do need to bring it up just a bit. So to help do that, I'm going to take a jack and put it underneath the rear axle so that the axle can flex up, and that's why it's important that we lift it by the frame. With the bracket lined up now and brought up, we're going to need to drill out the two lower holes, the one on each side, as well as the one right above it. Since the frame is going to be extremely hard, the key to drilling through this is going to be slow speed and a lot of pushing and pressure on it. But before you start drilling, it's always a good idea to kind of inspect what's behind the frames. You don't do any damage to any lines or any tubing or electrical cords that may be back there. So I'm going to start out with a rather small drill bit, kind of get me a pilot hole going, so it'll be easier to enlarge it to the full size. Another tip for drilling through this thick steel, you take a little bit of spray lubricant and you spray a little bit on the area you're going to be drilling, as well as on the end of the drill bit. It'll keep it from getting too hot and dulling out the bit before we're done. So every so often it's a good idea to just go ahead and stop, lube up the bit and the frame, and it'll cut a lot better. So with my pilot hole drilled out here, I'm going to go ahead and drill out all the other holes. So just this middle one, and then the two on the other side of my bracket. With all the pilot holes drilled, I'm going to come back, and you're going to want to use a drill bit that's just slightly bigger than a 3/8, maybe a 25/64 or one step bigger, and we're going to be drilling out a full-size hole going through the ones that we put our pilot hole in. And again, the key to this is going to be relatively slow speed and a lot of pressure, and don't be afraid to use that spray lubricant to keep the bit cool. With all the holes drilled out, we can take our 3/8 flange bolts. These are going to be the black ones, and there's no serrations on the bottom. We're going to push these through the bracket and through the frame. On the back side, we're going to take a couple more of those 3/8 locking flange nuts and we're going to secure them. Now it may be a little bit of a far reach, but we should be able to just reach behind the frame and loosely get them in place, just so we don't have to worry about them falling off. Just keep in mind again, you want to make sure it doesn't interfere with any kind of lines or any electrical connectors or any wires back there. So make sure you don't pinch them when you put that nut on. We'll get these secure and then we'll put the ones on the other side as well. We're going to want to grab a 9/16 socket and a wrench. And I'm going to hold the wrench on the back side, holding that nut in place, while I take the socket and tighten up the bolts. Once we have those tightened up, we'll tighten up the other side as well. With all the bolts installed, we can slowly lower the axle back down. We can reinstall our tires and start on the other side. That'll finish up your look at the SumoSprings Maxim custom helper springs for the rear axle, part number SSR-183-54-1 on our 2017 Newmar Canyon Star Motorhome.